What do you want? Your Wu-Tang manual.
Hey guys, what's up? So, this video is basically a response to Skallagrim. And also, I want to do a quick thank you to Skallagrim as well, because he recently did a video on the subject of whether or not you can learn martial arts and, weapon arts. It's all the same, martial arts. If you can learn martial arts, whether red-handed or weapon-wise, from books. And in that video, he also happened to have mentioned me in there and basically told people to subscribe to me if they were interested in the Chinese aspect of it all, since that's what I happen to dabble in. And it was funny because, and I'm going to try not to say a lot. I know it's one of my problems. I noticed, I was, in the middle of, work. I'm, looking for new work and stuff. And I happened to look at my phone. I'm like, where are all these subs coming from? All of a sudden, there's a huge influx of people just jumping in. What the? And then I happened to have checked this video. I'm like, oh, that's why. So I definitely want to thank him for that. And also for making that video in the first place. Because it's a topic that I've, with my friends at the very least, I've talked about before. And it's something of an ongoing debate. But at the same time, I think that it's that question's pretty much already been answered if you've been paying attention. Those of you who are new to coming to the channel, let me just say thank you. It does make me a little nervous because, I am hoping that you guys will be entertained by what I have. My videos aren't at the level of quality that Skallagrim's is, unfortunately. But I do try my best to present decent material when the subject is serious. I hope that you guys enjoy your stay, and I hope that this particular video, and at least my response to his, will prove, interesting for you guys, and that you're able to get something out of it. So, without further ado, let's get into it. He basically, of course, was going into the question of whether you can learn martial arts from books. And, he also touched on videos, which I will as well. And generally, his answer was yes and no. It basically boiled down to, no, you can't really learn it if all you're doing is just reading the book and maybe, shadow boxing in your backyard. That's not really going to work. I mean, martial arts is a physical thing. But if you are learning it and you're practicing it physically in a dedicated manner with your friends or some people, in your backyard, in your garage, gym, whatever. You got a place to practice and you guys are practicing it on each other practically, you're actually trying to train each other to spar and use it in a, a high pressure situation, in that type of context, then yeah, you could learn from it. It will take a while, but you could. That was generally his answer. And I more or less agree with that. What I wanted to add to this, however, is it also depends on the material itself. It depends on your own background before you pick the book up. And it even depends on the martial art. But generally, yeah, you can learn from the book. What I find kind of funny about this particular question is that it's one that keeps popping up sooner or later, especially when people are watching videos, say on YouTube, or they happen to pick up a book or something, and sooner or later they're like, can I learn from a book? And it usually comes from somebody who can't necessarily get into a school because they can't afford one, or there isn't one around, but they're still interested. They say, what do you do? And, things like books seem to be a good alternative. But then you got a lot of people going, you can't learn from a book. It's impossible. What's funny to me is that this is an old debate, a very old question. A lot older than people think. This is not new, at least in the Chinese standpoint of things. Skallagrim has shown me that it's also something that's been happening in the European context as well, because they had their own treatises, they had their manuals. Well, the Chinese have the same thing. In fact, that's become something of a trope, that ancient Chinese Kung Fu manual that they keep secret, which goes to show you how old this is, because there were such things. There were, Kung Fu manuals in the past. But what's kind of funny to me is how the dynamics of the whole learning from a book thing has changed, at least from the Chinese standpoint of things. If we're going to be talking about things like the Song Dynasty, Ming Dynasty, Qing Dynasty, China, when martial arts was, flourishing, because martial arts was, a trade skill back then. It's not like now. Like nowadays, we treat martial arts like a hobby. or, whether it's weapons based or not, whether it's, a mix of the two, whether it's purely barehanded, we treat it more or less as a side thing. I mean, yes, there are some people who use it to put food on the table, like, your professional sports guys, or people who are learning it specifically so they can enhance their military training, or bodyguards, things like that. But more or less, most people who learn it are just learning it for the sake of learning it. That stuff seems cool. I want to be able to do it too. Or I'm tired of being bullied, or whatever reason. Well, that's more of a practical reason. But generally, a lot of people go into it for the aesthetics. Back then, it was a trade skill. It was, if you were learning martial arts, it was because you were planning on using it to pretty much earn your bread. Whether legally or illegally, that's what you were learning martial arts for. Or you were learning it to protect your village, which in a way is still kind of, well, it's protecting yourself, keeping the bandits from getting your resources or messing up your town, so to speak. So, back then martial artists were bodyguards. They were in the military, or they were bandits, or worse off, they were street performers, which that was like the lowest of the low. Especially during, toward the late end of the Qing era and going into the Republican era, people did not look upon martial artists favorably, especially after the Boxer Rebellion. But I'm getting off topic. The point that I want to say is during that time period, when people were learning these skills, for a reason, like a concrete, solid reason, it wasn't just for the hell of it. Well, I'm pretty sure there were some that did that. Martial arts manuals were kind of rare, in the sense that, well, most martial artists at the time were kind of like laymen. They weren't scholars, and a good number of Chinese back then didn't know how to read. It's like if you were in the upper classes, if you were in the scholar class, or you were in the nobility class, the military class, yeah, you probably were able to read. Reading the Confucian classics and things like that. But by and large, if you were like a farmer, peasant, regular layperson, you most likely didn't know how to read. And a lot of martial artists, including the teachers, did not know how to read. And yet, they had martial arts manuals. So what the hell were they for? Well, many times it was a prestige thing. If you happen to have owned a school and you had your secret Kung Fu manual, well, that was your thing of, we're so awesome and sophisticated that we got a secret manual. But many times the teacher would just like go to somebody who knew how to write and, tell the guy like, these are the techniques, and describe the techniques to him. The guy would basically write it down, maybe do 1 or 2 crude drawings in there for each technique, and then there you go. And that was their, their little trophy. That was their prestige item. That was, their symbol of authority, so to speak. Like, this contains all the secrets. And he may or may not know how to read it. And even if he did, let me just say that right now is considered like the quote-unquote golden age for martial arts reference material. Old manuals, despite the fact that, man, the ancient manuals have some awesome techniques, the stuff we have now is a hell of a lot better in, teaching the student how to do the stuff that they're trying to learn. More on that later. There were decent manuals back then, but they were usually written, again, by military people who were coming up with ways to train their troops, or to come up with a very practical form of combat for warfare. Sometimes they were written by scholars who were really interested in martial arts, and there were a few. And other, there was a couple of dabblers who really went into things, and there are a few classic books that we can actually still get our hands on today, thanks to certain people keeping it in their collections. There's some people with private, collections of old martial arts manuals, and some of them, like, there's a publishing company in Taiwan, I'm thinking, for instance, I think it's called Lion Books. The guy who owns it happens to have this library of really old stuff that they're not considered classics. And he's been retranslating them and reprinting them for people who are interested in seeing them. And sometimes there's some decent information in there, particularly if you want to get an idea of how people trained back then, and to see the more practical side of Chinese martial arts that you don't really see often these days. But again, those manuals and those skills were kept secret. You couldn't just walk into a school and, like, I want to learn. Books were kept hidden. The techniques were kept hidden unless the teacher thought you were worthy enough and trustworthy enough to learn the style. But that changed during the Republican era. During that time period, and I've talked about this before in past videos, there was a shift in tone on martial arts. First of all, there was a shift in tone and people just completely disrespecting it. And the one group that is at the spearhead of turning that image around of, like, F martial arts was the Jing-Wu school, which I talked about in a couple of videos past. And they did a lot of things that pretty much, stayed to this day when it comes to Chinese martial arts. And one of the things that they were promoting was learning from books. they started printing their own pamphlets, their own manuals, because they were trying to make a program where anybody could learn. And they actually were like, yeah, you can learn from a book. Yeah, it's possible. You train hard and diligently and really, study the material and you could learn. Now, I'm not saying that they were straight up saying that, oh, you can be a straight up master, because they wanted people to go to their school and learn the program. But they still felt that reference materials were important, which is why they not only published a few, but they also had a few in their own library, and not just Kung Fu, but they also had books on Japanese arts and Western arts in their libraries for students to research, because they wanted to make a scientific approach to Kung Fu, and they were like looking at other people's scientific methods, because that was the rage at the time. The Western stuff is scientific, the Japanese are borrowing Western methods and they're becoming more scientific, so we need to do the same thing. And they believed that you could learn from a book. I don't think they were necessarily saying that you could be a straight up master just from the book alone, but they did feel you could at least be competent in it, and that's the point. And again, they were publishing these things, which meant that they were making it widespread, which is a big shift in tone. And the fact that the Jing-Wu school was straight up saying, yes, you could learn from a book, and then later on, government-sponsored martial arts programs during the Republican era were doing the same thing, which is where a lot of our older manuals kind of come from during that time period, the ones that are still surviving today. The fact that they said that says a lot about how the attitudes keep changing and whether you can learn from stuff or not. And these books were a bit more detailed. Like, if you're looking at a Ming or Qing Dynasty manual, it's usually just like a brief text, maybe a lyric or a poem line in there for only the martial artist himself to really understand what the hell he's reading. And then like one static image, and that's it. And you got to try to interpret that. The way that Skull himself pointed out, or if he's watching this the way you pointed out, how, you got this one image and you got to try to interpret how, you get from A to B with that. Like, what exactly am I looking at here? And it helps to have a background in the martial art you're learning to figure that out. But the Republican era started changing that. During that time period, manuals became more sophisticated. And nowadays, we got books that are, they go through each step. Like, instead of just simply showing this and go, this is the straight punch, it'll say you start from here, and then you twist your hip, and then you do this. And they'll have a picture for each motion. So books are getting more sophisticated, and they're geared pretty much towards people actually learning the art. So then the question becomes, is it possible to learn the art? Especially since there were people, especially people who were actually teaching martial arts, who suggested that you could learn from it. Well, I'll say, yes, you could, but again, it depends on the material. It really does. Because there are some martial arts that, well, first of all, it helps to have a background. I've always maintained that even if it's a video, because, now we got videos, which makes it even easier to figure out what's going on. But remember, you don't really have, like, if you have an experienced instructor there, they can help, to refine your movements. Like, you might be just doing it basically, but there might be some fine detail that you might be missing out on. And you don't have somebody who has a bit more experience to help you figure out, no, you're supposed to plant your feet here when you're doing it. You're not twisting your hips. Your shoulders are too high. Things like that. It helps to have an instructor, but if you got a diligent eye and you got more than one person looking at it, sometimes they can point it out too. So that can kind of offset that. But realize that it's going to take a while if you're doing it by yourself. Just like anything that you learn from a book, it's going to take a while unless you're constantly practicing it in the context that it's supposed to be practiced in. And in the case of martial arts, it has to be practiced physically against other people. If that component is missing, the book ain't going to help you. And worse, if the material itself doesn't have practical stuff in it, it's definitely not going to help you. Like if you picked up a Kung Fu manual on, say, contemporary Wushu forms, yeah, you could copy it and do it, but you aren't necessarily learning how to fight, because contemporary Wushu is not going to teach you how to fight. Sorry, it won't. But it also depends on not only your background. If you have a straight background in martial arts, then it's, you will have an easier time understanding the materials in those books. Especially if the martial art itself is advanced. And this is where I say now the context comes into it. Some martial arts are a little bit easier for beginners to understand. Like, say, long fists, Tongbei, especially like Qi family Tongbei. That's one that you see it right away, you know what the techniques are. Hongar to an extent, Piguozhang. A lot, arts that when you see the moves, they're more pugilistic minded. Like at Chua Jiao, it's just straight up like you can see that. Oh, that's a straight up punch. Oh, that's a parry. Oh, the guy's straight up kicking the guy. Beginners, if they go to a class, and they start, they know nothing about, Kung Fu, and they go into like a long fist class where the teacher's competent, is actually teaching them how to fight with it. Like he's actually drilling them the basics before he even puts them through a form. And then a month's time of training properly, they should know what they're doing at least on a basic level. But then you got arts like Bagua Zhang, Xingyi, Daji Chuan, hell, even Pigua to an extent, depending on certain motions, or high-level long fist forms. You throw that at a beginner, and they're not going to know what the hell is going on. That material is a bit too advanced. There are some, believe it or not, there are some martial arts that weren't really meant for beginners, which also certain books on the subject really weren't meant for beginners. You can't really get it from scratch. Bagua Zhang is a good example. That art, the guy who developed the art, like, he would not even teach anybody Bagua unless the guy already knew how to fight. I should do a video on Bagua itself. It's really interesting. But yeah, his students, like, the guy who started the Cheng style, later on the guy who started the Yin style, Yin Fu, those guys already had skills in other arts before the guy who the Bagua founder taught them. And then those skills that they already knew, they married it to the Bagua that they learned. So that's how you get the different styles of Bagua. This is how styles develop, by the way. People have their specialties, and then they learn the martial art, and then they get into it. A beginner's not really going to understand an art like that. And then when you write a book with these advanced techniques and these concepts in there, that guy can probably study for a year and probably still not really understand how to develop it, do it in a practical context, unless the book was really well written and the guy is diligent in practicing it and has some people he can practice it on. Having said all that, I do think that you could learn from the books if you work hard enough and with the caveats that I mentioned. And there are some books, especially these days, I'm noticing that there is a really concentrated effort by some teachers to come up with materials that people can pretty much learn from, or at the very least get a good foundation on. Yang Jwing-Ming, for instance, just constantly keeps pumping out books and videos and DVDs on the stuff that he teaches. And I've noticed over the years they've just gotten more and more sophisticated, though even his earlier works were chock full of good information. A good example, at least for a beginner, like a book that's recommended to a lot of beginners, is on his book on Long Fist, which is like a primer on the style. It's a pretty thick book. It's considered to be pretty good by those in the know. And it goes through everything: basic strikes, basic stances, hitting the heavy bag, how you should stand and how you should practice, how many times you hit the bag. Then it goes into the forms, and each form is done in an ascending order of difficulty. And it breaks down the forms not only on how to do them, but how to even apply them, at least on a basic level. And many people who've seen this is a damn good book, in the sense that it will help a beginner learn. It's a good primer on the subject. He's got a lot of other materials that I felt, if somebody's actually using it as a study material and not just reading it and then shadowboxing in the backyard, you should do fine with it. Ted Mancuso, another Kung Fu teacher who I really respect, has made a really concentrated effort on putting out stuff that people could learn from. His book on Bagua, by the way, is probably the only one I can think of right now, at least what I've come across, because I haven't come across that many, but it's the one I've come across that actually does a good job of teaching the concept to a beginner. Which is rare. That's like, wow. Like, someone who doesn't know anything at all could probably do okay with that book, provided they take baby steps. If you do have a background in something, however, you're going to be going through this like, oh, wow, this is good. Because he breaks the movements down and the concepts down so well. It's almost as if you're in the class with him. It's really well done. There's some videos also that have done a really good job on teaching arts. And then lately they're even trying to come up with video book combinations, like Jason Tsou's excellent book on Chinese sword fighting. It happens to not. I'll put the link in the description of some of these books I'm talking about. It's pretty much a textbook on getting the person used to fighting with a Chinese sword in basic ways, and it does it in a sports context, but it still does a good job of teaching the student the basics and how to start from stretching exercises, basic stances into the basic strikes, how to employ those strikes, fencing, proper ways of fencing, and then it's got the DVD attached to it to help you along. It's like a training course. So these books are getting more and more sophisticated. And because of that, it's getting easier and easier for the serious group of students to learn from if they don't have any other way of doing it. Now, notice I said, again, serious group of students. Martial arts are physical arts. They're physical skills. You can't just read the book, think about it in your head, maybe practice it a couple of times in your room a little bit, and think that you're going to do well in a stressful situation. That's not going to happen. But if you are actually training with a group of friends and you're poring over the material the same way you would pour over, reference materials in college when you have a group project, you then have a better chance. That's the type of mindset you need, and you need to be diligent about it. You need to have time to practice it. This is how HEMA got started. And because there was no masters around to teach these guys in the very beginning what they were doing. They had to go out and find the manuals and read them and research them and reinterpret them and, practice on each other and, get a few broken bones. They were like, going through hell to learn this stuff. And now these guys are good. They're good. I think the HEMA guys are a great example. If you want to point to a group of people who've learned from books and are competent, point to the HEMA guys. Because that's what they had to do. So anybody's telling you that you can't learn, yes, you can. But the reference material's got to be good. You got to be diligent. It helps to have a little bit of a background in fighting. It's a good plus. And, the material has to be easy for you to, interpret. But, you can. I think you really can learn from it. And, if you don't have any other options, as long as you're willing to put in the work, the books can help you out. So yeah, that's pretty much my stance on it all. I hope to have some more videos kind of explaining some of the stuff that I mentioned here right now. I would really like to go into forms and how they really work. I would like to go into what I mean by advanced concepts that beginners may not understand. Like something, I've noticed that the higher level the martial art, or even and I hate to say higher level martial art because it makes it sound like the martial arts are basic level. That's not really true. They're just more beginner friendly. But all really good fighting systems have advanced concepts that just, straight up just, beginners or guys who just simply care about what's obvious aren't going to get. But if they stick with it long enough, then they'll be able to pick up more subtle stuff. Advanced martial arts, I notice, is like in the beginning, you're concentrating on actual technique. Like kicks, punches, how to stand, how to punch. Different types of punches, different types of kicks, and then go out there and put those basic building blocks together and just F that dude up. Once you start moving into a more advanced material, now it's really teaching you more how to move. They'll give you a movement, and you practice that movement, and the movement is there to drill your body in, specific, how to move more efficiently, how to generate power more efficiently, and in subtle ways that is going to increase your effectiveness in fighting way beyond what the average fighter does. And those movements that you learned, you turn into techniques. Like at first you're punching because that's how you will learn how to punch. And then later on you're like, now you're learning a movement. And that movement you turn into a technique. And it can turn into a number of techniques. Like this one thing could be so many different things depending on the context of how you fought. And that's the type of thing I would really like to do a video on at some point. Not because I think I'm a master or anything, because I'm not, but because I think anybody who's interested in fighting might find that fascinating. So I really want to do something on that. Just got to find the right people to do it on, and I got to find the time. On top of all the crap that's been happening lately, but don't need to get into that. So yeah, I'm going to put, like I said, I'm going to put links in the description of some of the books I was talking about that I think are pretty decent for anybody who's interested. And to give you an example of what I think are good materials. There are a couple of crappy materials out there. But I can't remember them at the time. Maybe I might link them, maybe I won't. I'll also, for those of you who are new to the channel, you guys who are coming from Skallagrim's camp are most likely only interested in the martial arts aspect of my channel. So that, I'm going to link a couple of videos that you guys might find interesting if you haven't seen them already. Keep in mind that my channel is eclectic. I don't just do martial arts and sword stuff here. In fact, my channel really got started in the beginning talking about politics and religion. And I haven't done that in a while. I need to kind of get back into that a little bit. I also, every now and then I just do rants. I sometimes do stuff in video games, which I really need to get back on track of for the people who enjoyed that. And I sometimes just do plain silly stuff. So just warning you now, it's not just martial arts I talk about, but I've lately been focusing on it because I've been trying to focus on it more myself in my life because I'm trying to get back to the shape I was in when I was younger. So this has gone on really long, and I apologize for that. That's something else I got to warn you guys about. The videos on my channel can get long. I'm kind of known for that. If you don't mind that, and if you like the material here, you know, please stay a while, you know, and I hope that what I have is going to be, you know, worthwhile for you guys to watch. I plan on having some really good stuff soon. In fact, that was something I was supposed to do today, but I saw the Skallagrim video, and I'm like, I got to do that first. So, anyway, enough yapping. See you guys soon. Catch you guys later.